Let's talk about the different types of fermenters used in homebrewing and the pros and cons of each. Welcome to the Fermentation. I'm Brian.
I'm Derica.
And today we're talking about a question that comes up all the time. People say, why'd you use this fermenter over that fermenter? What do you think about this fermenter? What do you think about that fermenter? So we're going to answer.
We're going to start off with size. We get this question a lot. Many people seem discouraged or upset that we're using 1 gallon primarily.
But I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
Does size matter?
Yes.
When it comes to a fermenter, it does.
It does. So for us, because we are an educational style adjacent channel, we prefer the 1 gallon, mostly because it's easier for us to have shown to you what we're doing and all the different processes.
Yeah, we don't have to lift up heavy things.
Also, there's only 2 of us.
Yeah, we make like 45 to 55 brews a year. We don't need more than 45 to 55 gallons.
We don't need to mass produce alcohol.
Other than water.
Yeah. Also, they're a lot easier to agitate. When you get into the larger sizes, you're going to need to have additional equipment like the whip on the drill attachment to really get things mixed up well. And we're trying to keep things easy and approachable here.
Right.
So that's why we prefer the 1 gallon. Also, size matters because of space, the final frontier.
Right.
It takes up a lot of physical space to store multiple fermenters, even the 1 gallons. We have...
Our fermentation is full. There's stuff on the floor.
Half gallons.
3/4 gallons.
3/4 gallons.
1 gallons. 5 liters. And 2 gallons. We also still have a 3 gallon, I think, or did I give that to Bobby? I think that
we gave one of them to
gave
Bobby.
One away.
I think
we still have one. And I have at least 1 5-gallon glass. And I think 1 or 2 5-gallon buckets too.
Yes.
So we have all the different sizes. We just rarely use anything larger than 1 gallon. But I will just say this right now. If you want to make a 2 gallon or 3 gallon or 5 gallon recipe from any of our 1 gallons, just multiply everything by the number of gallons you're making. No big deal. It's a very, very simple thing. Comes up a lot. The only thing you don't generally change is yeast. Yeast, you go with my rule of thumb, which means up to 3 gallons, you use half a packet. Over 3 gallons, you use a full packet. At 3 gallons, it's your choice. Either way works.
Now, beyond what is a full packet is up to
6 gallons or so.
Yeah. So beyond that, you're going to have to use multiple packets.
Yeah, but
we never mentioned that because it's
not
homebrew.
Many people are really making a lot more than 6 gallons at a time. I mean, some are. I've had people ask.
Sure, but it's important to cover all your bases.
Got to be clear.
Absolutely.
But that's why we're going to focus mostly on 1 gallon to 2 gallon sizes in this particular talk, because that's what we're most familiar with. That's what we use most. We will talk about the larger ones and pros and cons too.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to start with our probably most favorite and easily accessible to us, and that's the glass Carboy. So this is going to be a 1 gallon vessel. Here, it's really common for us to find it at the grocery store filled with free apple juice.
Yeah, that's not as common as it used to be.
Yeah.
One other thing I'd like to say, though, you're saying they're 1 gallon. They're actually 1 gallon and 1.3 gallon, or the 5 liter. We found a couple of them that are glass.
Sure.
2 of them came from North Mountain Supply. They have a narrow mouth and a wide mouth, just like the regular 1 gallon has a narrow mouth and a wide mouth.
Right.
So there are a couple choices here. I really love the 5 liter size to start with. I really do. I'll just say that.
We're going to talk about the size differences a little bit later. Right now, we're just focusing on
jumping ahead like I always do.
The different styles, I guess, is the best way to say
So basically narrow mouth versus wide mouth.
Right. So the glass Carboy, what we're talking about is a circular main vessel with a tapered neck. Normally it has a little
handle. They're like the old moonshiner's bottles.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a podcast, so we can't show you. So it's like, that's why my hands are down.
I'm gesturing wildly, and it's not helping at all.
That's why my arms folded, if you're watching rather than listening. I have my arms folded so that I can't talk with my hands today.
So the plus side of these is, one, they're glass. So they're really easy to sanitize. They're really easy to not have to worry about degradation, because glass, not grass, is more stable.
Not so permeable.
Right. So
And it doesn't degrade into the brew.
We're not going to have to worry about contamination of different
Right.
alcohols, or like capsaicin is a big thing. So they're really easy to clean and keep from cross-contaminating your different brews.
Right. And the narrow mouth generally is like, the bung size is like 6 or 6.5. They're only about 1.5 inches opening for the mouth of the bottle. So that's why we call it a narrow mouth, which is great if you don't have solids going in. If you just have liquids, the narrow mouth is great.
Right.
You can fit it with a bung and an airlock really easy, and they usually make a good seal. For all those reasons, they're great.
Sure. They're easy to mix.
Yeah, they're easy to mix up because you can just get a solid stopper and put it in there and shake it up, shake the bejesus out. But in an ideal situation, they're perfect. But not every brew situation is ideal. And that's where the wide mouths come in.
Right. And Brian mentioned that briefly in talking about the Carboy, is that they're great for liquids, not so much for solids. And so we move on to the wide mouth. And this is basically like a oversized...
it's a gallon pickle jar. Let's just be honest. That's what they are.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like your canning jars, just 1 gallon size.
Yeah. And these are also fantastic. I really like them. The advantage is you can reach your hand right in there. If you have to grab something out, they're much easier to clean. You can use whole fruits and things like that in them. We have found that they are ever so slightly smaller than the 1 gallon Carboys. I mean, like 1/10 of a gallon less. It's like 0.9 gallons. Actually, no. The regular narrow mouths are like 1.1 or 1.2 gallons.
Yeah.
And then the wide mouth is literally like 1 gallon. We actually have a video on that.
We do. And I'll make sure I link that in the description in case you want to go see that.
I find that the wide mouths are a little bit more fragile. We haven't really broken any more than any other, but they feel like they should be more fragile. They're a thinner glass in general, and they don't hold a seal quite as well because now you have a larger area with a screw cap to cover versus just a singular bung. So that's sort of a slight disadvantage, though it doesn't matter. It just makes it harder to watch the bloop, bloop, bloops on the airlock.
Brian did mention cleaning, and this is something that I was remiss in not mentioning in the 1 gallon. With the 1 gallon Carboy, that is, you will need a bottle brush that has a crick in the neck, so that way you can really get in there and get all the different angles.
Ours is customized.
Lots of times the croissant will be in a really hard place to wash. It's going to be right in that angled area on the 1 gallon Carboy. And so you have to make sure that your brush is angled just right to scrub that down, because some of those proteins really want to stick.
Yep.
I've found a helpful hint is that if you soak it in hot soapy water, that's going to loosen that up and make it a lot easier to clean. But with the wide mouth 1 gallon, you can literally just get a nice soapy sponge and stick your whole hand in there and clean all the spots, and you don't have to worry so much about any of those proteins being stuck in places that you can't reach.
People ask us every so often, we get this question, can we do a video on how we clean our Carboys? And I'm always a little, like, I don't really know how to answer that nicely. It's like, you just wash dishes. That's basically it. I mean, if you get if you have dishes and bottles and stuff like that you wash on a normal basis, it's the same thing. We just wash them. Use brushes to get at stuff that's hard to reach, just like you would with any other dishes. So for that aspect, it's no different. And that's why we've never bothered to make a video on it. That and our kitchen situation is not conducive to doing that. Now in the new house, we might actually do one.
We're gonna have a big tub style sink.
Yeah, we have like a workshop style sink. Maybe we will do a how to wash dishes video.
Just because I'll be so proud of our new sink.
Yeah.
So that is the 2 primary versions of the glass.
The most basic way to look at it, yes. And even if we get into like North Mountain's 5-liter ones, I can talk briefly about those too. Their 5-liter narrow mouth has all the advantages of the 1 gallon narrow mouth, except it does not have a handle. Now, it does come in a plastic tote type of thing, but I didn't like that, so I took mine out of it. It's a really, really pretty fermenter, if you've seen it in any of our videos. It is a little bit more expensive than the regular 1 gallon, but I think for the 5-liter, it's worth it. We'll talk about size differences in a minute.
It's really thick glass,
Very
too.
thick
So
glass,
that's a nice...
It's Italian glass, It's fragile. But their wide mouth version does not actually have a full sealing cap. So for that, you got to use a cheesecloth lid, which, it makes it feel more rustic. That's how I like to sell it. But in all honesty, I'd rather see an airlock if given my choice. But I also know that just covering it with cheesecloth or just whatever works just fine. You just don't get to see the bloop, bloop, bloops in your airlock because there is no airlock.
Right. And for primary fermentation, it's really not an issue because you're going to have tons of off-gassing due to the fermentation process. We actually have on our table right in front of us right now something brewing in that. But once it's done with primary, we'll probably move it to a different vessel, mostly because there's lots of solids in there. And so it's going to need a smaller vessel anyway. But also because after primary fermentation is done, we personally feel more comfortable in an airlock situation.
We've done conditioning with the cheesecloth, but it's not preferable.
We've never had an issue.
Yeah. Now, that also brings us to a reason to use a 5-liter vessel over a 1-gallon vessel. And you'll see this this trend will form through this entire video. From a 5-liter to 1 gallon is only about 1.2 liters or so different. Okay. So they're not that different in size, but that means if you start in a 5-liter vessel with a little bit of headspace, once you rack it, now you should have a full gallon left so that you can rack it to a 1-gallon vessel. Versus if you start in a 1-gallon vessel, you might not have enough brew left to fill a 1-gallon vessel again. Now we've gone from like a narrow mouth 1 gallon to a wide mouth 1 gallon at times, but that's why we have 3/4 gallon and half-gallon vessels as well. You're almost always stopping down just a little bit in size as you rack. And that's one reason to do a 5-liter primary and then a 1 gallon for conditioning phase or secondary, however you like to call it.
All right. So again, I believe that covers the majority of the glass fermenters that are available.
The 1 gallon and for 1.3s.
The 1 gallon size. So we're going to move now to the plastic fermentation vessels. And we're going to start off with probably one of the most common, and that's the good old plastic bucket.
Yep. They usually come in 2-gallon sizes, but you can also get 5-gallon sizes. We've even seen a couple that were like 1 gallon, but they're pretty rare. We also have the one from North Mountain Supply. We call it the TARDIS. It's square.
That is not what I'm talking about.
Oh.
We're talking about buckets.
Okay, let's talk about buckets
then. TARDIS is not a bucket.
I thought we were just talking about plastic in general. We're talking about buckets. Okay, well, on to buckets. So the 2-gallon bucket is probably the most ubiquitous of all the buckets.
Right. And the pros of the bucket is that they're really easy to get. They're lightweight. If you have multiples, you can stack them inside of each other. I would say that you probably want a piece of cardboard or something in between them because sometimes they kind of
stick together,
vacuum to each other, and it's nearly impossible to get them apart. So try to have a barrier in between. You can still stack them, but it'll make it a lot easier to separate them. They're, again, an open vessel, so they're easy to clean, but you want to be more careful about the plastic because they can scratch.
Right.
And any little scratches that you get in plastic is a place for bad things to hide, such as bacteria and cross-contamination of different flavors from a previous brew, particularly capsaicin.
Makes it really hard to sanitize them.
I don't want to get too scientific, but the way plastic is made,
it's molecularly similar to fat.
Right. So capsaicin in particular, since it's kind of
it's water soluble.
Yeah, it can penetrate.
It sticks.
The plastic. And so even if it's completely clean and sanitary, it could still leach some of that capsaicin into your next brew. We accidentally did that. It ended up being a happy accident because it was a lovely flavor.
We've had it more than once,
but it wasn't what we intended. So if you're going to stick with plastic because that's really just what your budget allows, I would dedicate a capsaicin bucket if you were doing
that's a good idea.
Any chili type brews. And all of them just use that bucket and don't use that bucket for anything else.
Did you not figure out a way to get rid of it in the plastic? Didn't you figure something out?
Yeah. There's lots of different ways. None of them are particularly cost effective, but you want to look for some solvent that's going to counter the capsaicin. So you can do multiple soakings of hot soapy water, which is probably the most effective, but you're going to have to do that multiple times. You can also, if you happen to have a cheap high octane spirit, that is going to help leach out those things because alcohol is also a solvent.
Crappy scotch.
Yeah. Get that Scoresby's to work. There are other ways of doing it. Just Google foo and see what's going to work best for you. But honestly, if you're sticking to plastic as your brewing vessel, I would just have a dedicated capsaicin bucket for any of your spicy brews.
Call it the chili bucket.
That's right.
And there you go.
So another thing that I wanted to mention here, and I think this is probably where Brian got confused. So we've learned from our friends at North Mountain Supply that not all buckets are the same. And in my personal opinion, and I think Brian shares it with me, their buckets are superior. And that's because they have gotten a bucket that is semi-transparent and also graduated. So you can see through the bucket to see where your level is. And there's a gauge that tells you how much you have in that bucket, which is really helpful, particularly for us, because our primary use, as Brian has already mentioned, for a bucket is to have our primary fermentation with solids in it.
Right.
So we need to be able to have a visual clue of what's going on in there to make sure we're not having any issues.
That's probably my biggest complaint on using buckets in general, is that you can't see what's going on inside. You have to open it to find out. And every time you open it, you are letting some oxygen in. There's a little bit of a risk. The more you have to do that, the more that risk gets compounded. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to have problems. We've actually never had a problem. But the simple fact that you have to open it just to see, is there little tiny bubbles coming up the side? That tells me that's less than ideal. Also, not knowing how much is in there. We've had it happen a couple times where we were making recipes, and it was great to just be able to fill the liquid to 1 gallon in a 5 liter or 2 gallon bucket, and it just worked beautifully well. So there's that. Now you can graduate a plastic bucket too, and you can see through the sides just enough to be able to measure to there. So there's ways around it. I mean, you can certainly still do it.
There's also been some times where we thought there was plenty of headspace in there, but things got a little too active, and we didn't know until it starts creeping out the sides or pushes the lid off.
Yep.
Luckily, that hasn't happened too often, but I think once or twice we've actually had that issue.
Yeah. Now, something else that doesn't really have anything to do with the size of Carboy here, but it sort of does. And that is, for primary fermentation, when you are adding things in, the size of your vessel actually doesn't matter. What I mean is that you can make a quart batch in a 1 gallon fermenter. You can make a 1 gallon batch in a 5 gallon fermenter. It doesn't matter. It's just going to take longer for the gases to fill up that space, and it's harder for it to overflow. That's what reminded me of it. So that's why we started using larger fermenters for primary. That way we don't have to worry about them overflowing as much. We used to use the glass fermenters exclusively so that everybody could see what we were doing, and we ended up having to put them on a tray and leave them out for the first few days. And many times we came out the next morning to a big surprise of a mess in the kitchen because they spattered all over the place. Since we've started using a slightly larger vessel, we don't really have that problem anymore. It's kind of nice. It's less cleanup, less waste too, because every drop that goes out that airlock and all over the kitchen is a drop that we don't get to drink later. So, that's something to keep in mind.
So I think we're done with buckets.
I don't think we're done with buckets yet. And here's why. There's advantages and disadvantages. We didn't get into some of the disadvantages. The advantages are that you can reach in there and you can really, put larger volumes. They're really cheap. They're easy to get. You can have a bunch of them. They store easily. That's all the great things about them. The disadvantages, like we said, you can't see through them too easily. And you also, like we said about sanitizing, but also the lids, you got a 50-50 shot whether your bucket's going to seal because it's plastic. And over time, those, the lids don't snap on quite as tight as they used to. The more you use it, the less it seals. Now, that's not really a reason to not use them, okay? Just like when we were talking about before with the 5 liter wide mouth where I use cheesecloth on it, there's no harm in that because bugs can't get in and the gases can get out. Well, the same thing happens with a lid, even if it doesn't make a perfect seal. The gases are still getting out and you still have an airlock on there, but bugs cannot get in. And that's what the seal is really for. We've had a lot of people get worried that the lid popped off their brew in the first couple of days or their airlock fell out and they thought that it was automatically spoiled. No, not at all. I mean, I know people whose airlock fell out and it was months later and the brew was still fine because it's just really hard for oxygen to get in there and mix if there's CO2 coming out. CO2 is heavier than oxygen. So it's not going to be an automatically bad situation. And that's something I just wanted to really stress that because a lot of people, that's why they don't like to use buckets, is because the seals don't work. Well, that's not really a reason to not use a bucket.
In our personal experience, oxygen isn't as much of a worry as fruit flies are. Now, we're in Florida, and this, I think, is the fruit fly capital of the United States. I'm not sure. I'm probably just speaking out my tuchus there, but
I don't know. They're pretty ubiquitous. They're all over the place.
They're really obnoxious, and they are literally biologically bred to search and find fermenting fruit.
Yep. The smell of fermentation, all the signs of fermentation, that's what they are attracted to.
Right.
So
Because
it's not the fruit itself, it's the fermentation of the fruit that they go after.
So if you get any fruit flies in your house, they're going to hunt and destroy. They're going to look for those fermentation smells. And so those are going to be coming out of your airlock. And so that's why you might see them dead in your airlock. And that was what the airlock is
for them in the air.
For. But if you have a bucket and you're not seeing activity in your airlock, but you still have an airlock, you still have the liquid in there, and it's still sealed good enough, there's not going to be a space for them to crawl in there. Now, if your lid does pop off, you want to make sure that you don't see any activity of fruit flies. If you don't, make sure to seal it back up and clean everything up and make sure it's good. But the fruit fly, I would say, is more a worry than the oxygen.
There was only one time, and this is going to be weird and probably gross. We're going to talk about it. There was a video that we didn't show.
Yep.
Because on the first primary check, there was alcohol in it already, but there was actually live larvae of fruit flies in the brew. And this freaked us out.
Yep, we dumped it.
Yeah, we just dumped it out. It wasn't even a question. When I took the sample, I saw a couple and they were moving. I was like, what in the heck is going on here and how did that have happened?
It was like...
I want to say that was before we were putting star sand in our airlocks.
Could have been, yeah.
And I'm betting you...
Yeah, I think it was just water.
A couple of bugs got in there and decided to make a baby, and they made a bunch of them. It was absolutely horrifying to look at, though.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
We were flummoxed because we knew there was alcohol in there.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be an environment to support life, but hey.
Flummoxed, that's a good word.
Life will find a way.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't know how they're alive in there, but they were. They were totally alive. And we just... That's it. Dump it. Not showing it. There was nothing to show because we dumped it out. I mean, in hindsight, I really wish we still had the footage because I think we dumped that too. We got erased it. I wish we had it, and I wish we showed it because to me, there's no better example of why you don't just put water in your airlock than that.
Right.
And why a good seal and covering your brew is important if you have potential for fruit flies.
Lots of people. Well, not lots of people. It's kind of half and half. But some people get upset with our little jokes and silly things that we say on City Steading Brews. And we learned this technique from being wedding photographers, that if you say something silly or in like a song type format, annoying as it may be, people will remember that.
Yep.
And so we try to emphasize things that we feel are really important, particularly for the safety of our viewers, so that way they remember it and they'll do it. And that's why I do the red bucket of sanitization with jazz hands. And
that's why the jokes don't change.
Because sanitization is important. And we want you to be healthy and successful in your home brewing journey.
But I want to say something else about sanitization. It's very important to be clean. It is not crucial to be 100% sanitary. And don't take this the wrong way. What I mean is do the best you can. Don't get lazy. Don't, do things you shouldn't do. But I know some people that take it to the umpteenth level. Like they basically make a clean room for their brew room and they're, wearing masks and rubber gloves and just insane amounts of sanitary measures, which really aren't necessary. We do probably as much as is needed. We make sure that everything is clean before we start. We sanitize everything. Our hands are constantly being dunked in sanitizer. You be as careful as you can. And that's the trick. We've never once had an infection due to bad sanitation practices. That should say something right there. We've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah. All right. So now I think we can move on to the TARDIS.
Oh, can we now? We can finally talk about the TARDIS?
We can talk about the TARDIS. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the TARDIS, we can't actually label it the TARDIS.
No,
and,
it's just a nickname.
But I named it the TARDIS because I feel like it's bigger on the inside.
Yeah, this thing is actually like smaller than a regular 1 gallon wide mouth.
This is a compact square plastic with screw top lid, 5 liter, right? It's a 5 liter?
Mm-hmm.
And if you put it side by side next to a 1 gallon, it looks smaller. And if it was glass, I would just throw everything away and only use that.
Yeah. But if it was glass, it'd be much larger. Now, one thing, before we talk about plastic any further, we have to say one thing. When we say plastic buckets, we are talking about ones literally made for brewing.
Yes.
If you use something that is not made for brewing, you have to make sure that it is completely food safe.
Yes, absolutely. We've had some people use some pretty questionable fermentation buckets.
Yep.
And
Paint buckets, caulk buckets, stuff like that.
And being that it's plastic, again, I've already mentioned this with the capsaicin, they are permeable. Stuff can get in there. And so if it was used
and it dissolves
in the past to store something you should not consume,
you have to be careful with that.
Please don't use that.
Yeah, I wouldn't use it. I would only use food safe buckets. Now, a lot of people have said, like, go to a bakery and get like frosting buckets and stuff like that. That sounds great because that's going to be food safe.
Yep.
Anything that had food in it before, you should be pretty reassured that it's food safe. Yeah. You'll just have to cut your own hole and put a grommet in, that kind of thing.
Which is really no big deal.
Yeah, it's really not. I mean, I know a lot of people that have saved a ton of money by getting basically throwaway buckets and doing it that way. There's nothing wrong with that. I actually applaud that kind of thing. That's pretty cool.
Another thing about the buckets, I know we jumped to TARDIS, but this is a stream of conscious thing. We have bullet points, but we don't have a full script. So
that's why it's a podcast.
We're just trying to remember all the things we want to say.
Yeah, there's about 25 words on this piece of paper here, you know.
So one of our jokes that we have with buckets is that if it doesn't snap, your seal's crap.
Yep. I didn't know where she was going with that.
Okay.
That's my look of what?
And that's because the buckets feel like they're sealing, but you really have to be kind of violent with it. Mm-hmm. And they should make a loud snapping sound. And that means that the seal is actually engaged.
But even then, as the buckets get older, like I said earlier, they don't always seal as well as you'd like them to. We're starting to experience that with some of ours.
Right. But there's been times where we didn't hear the snap and we thought it was sealed and it wasn't as sealed as well.
And then you could snap it on even more.
Yeah. So keep that in mind. And also check the interior of your bucket because there should be, in the lid, there should be a soft plastic, like a
gasket.
A foam gasket. Mm-hmm. If you have the ability to replace those, great, because that's going to help maintain your seal because that can degrade more quickly than the rest of the bucket.
Yeah, like a lot of people that are using a little big mouth bubbler, they'll get extra foam seals and just like double or triple them up sometimes.
Yep.
But back to the TARDIS. The TARDIS is it's a North Mountain Supply product. It's cube, square. It's not a cube really. It's
rectangular.
It's a rectangular. It's square from top to bottom, but it's longer. It's taller than it is wide. So it's not truly a cube. It's Italian made, and we've actually found that to be really effective.
Oh, yeah.
I kind of want to get a few more of those.
I love that thing.
They are very space efficient because they're not as tall as a regular fermenter, so you can put them into places where a regular fermenter would go, like a 1 gallon, but they're also not as wide because they're square. So all those corner spaces that are wasted on a round fermenter are used.
Yeah.
And it actually just makes it very efficient. So we might end up getting a few more of those once we move.
Right. If you store your vessels on a shelf or in a cabinet, those are all going to be square. They're are rectangular. So you could line up a bunch of these type of TARDIS style. I don't even know what they actually call them, but
I don't know either.
It'll be linked in the description below.
Description.
But you can have tons of those on the same space where you could only have a few of the other fermentation vessels.
I think we've talked about the plastic and glass long enough. Now it's time to get the most controversial topic of all, the spigot.
All right. So spigots are introduced into the fermentation realm, be it glass or plastic, as a convenience thing.
I'll just be on the record right now and say, I don't like them.
No.
Not a fan.
And the reason why we don't like them is because the concept is that you can rack directly from your fermentation vessel.
Yep.
But then if you don't put an attachment onto your spigot,
like tubing,
then you're just going to be aerating.
Yeah.
It's just going to be floating in the space.
Now, it's easy enough to put a piece of silicone tubing on there, but at that point you might as well just use an auto siphon. The other reason why I don't like them is a lot of times they're usually a cheaper kind of plastic. Depending on the brand you're using, sometimes you cannot use Star San with those. They will actually degrade the seals and the gaskets and all the parts of the plastic spigot. Also, they are put at a predetermined height in the vessel, and you're supposed to be able to rack right to there. Well, what if you didn't have as much sediment? Now you just lost all that, or you have to move the vessel while you're racking it, thereby possibly disturbing that lees and getting lees coming out when you're trying to rack off the lees, which is kind of defeating the purpose. There's so many things. Plus, what if you have lees that goes past the level of the spigot? Now you're just sucking up lees instead of siphoning good liquid. I would much rather use an auto siphon and be in complete control of all of that myself. Yes, I'm a control freak. I am sorry.
That being said, as other things we've mentioned before, not all spigots are made the same. So some of them are going to be a better quality plastic. Some of them are going to have better quality gaskets to affix them to whatever vessel they're attached to. There are spigots that go with glass containers. There are spigots that go with plastic containers. The spigots in general are going to be plastic. So again, as Brian mentioned, with Star San or whatever sanitization you're using, you want to make sure that it's compatible with the materials that your carboys or fermentation vessels are made of. And that kind of brings us into a little segue of a vessel that we're...
Wait.
I'm waiting.
The other reason for spigots is, to me, it's a weak point. Okay. It's a failure point. So I like things that I know I can use it, reuse it, wash it, use it, wash it. You know, you're washing it every time, obviously, but just keep reusing for years. Many of the fermenters we've been using for years. With a spigot, I feel like that's going to be your point of failure. That's where things are going to go bad. A plastic bucket, okay, it's like $20 for a plastic bucket. I'll use that for 10 years and then get a new one if it gets scratched up or whatever. With a spigot, I don't know that I'd even get 10 years on it because I'd feel like that spigot's going to leak or we have a problem. And the first time you have a leak from a spigot at all, you will never want a spigot again.
All the other fermentation vessels that we've talked about so far, the joining portions are all at the top, where the spigot is going to be in the bottom. So
leakage is never a problem until you introduce a spigot to the bottom.
Right. And so that can jump us to the next thing that we weren't going to talk about, but we're going to talk about it because it's not included in our list for reasons. And that is the Conical Fermenter. So this has, again, all those things we were talking about, the spigot, the joining things, all at the base. It's designed that way.
It's a point of failure.
And that's some scary stuff right there.
Okay, now I just want to say something. I know a lot of people that use conicals and they love them. They swear by them. And personally, I have never fermented in a conical. I owned a conical fermenter for 1 week. We bought it. And before it even arrived, I found out that the exact brand that we had, you cannot use Star San to clean. And I was like, what?
We actually contacted the...
Yeah, I spoke with the
company.
Yeah. And they told me, nope, you can't use Star San. I said, so you can't actually sanitize. And they gave me a little bit of a song and dance about this other stuff that they said to use that is not a sanitizer. It's a cleaner, and said that that's good enough. I'm like, well, you can say that that's good enough, but that's not sanitization, whatever, however you want to say it. And it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And we gave the thing away. But we told the person we gave it away to why we gave it away too. Yeah. And they still wanted it, so that's fine.
We're very much a practice what we preach kind of channel collective, because we don't want to steer you wrong. We don't want to tell you to do one thing and then not actually follow those practices ourselves.
Yeah, this isn't a do as I say, not as I do.
We don't feel that that's appropriate. We want to share with you our personal experience, not tell you to do something that we don't really know anything about.
Now, the advantages to a conical is a lot of times they have a collection pot at the bottom for lees, which is in theory a great idea. You can just like close off the fermenter and all the lees should be in this one globe or pot in the bottom, another container at the bottom. And in theory, that's wonderful, except that it comes with all the same problems I was talking about with the spigot. Meaning, what if it didn't get all the lees? What if it got more than just lees? Now you wasted some product. There's a lot of give and take with these. And that's why we're just trying to give the pros and cons. What you choose to use is completely your choice, and I will stand behind you 100% if you have a valid reason or any reason to want to use that over anything that we do. It doesn't really matter to us. As long as it works for you, That's great. But before someone makes a choice on something, I'd rather them know what they're getting into. That's kind of what this is about.
Now, if for some reason we happen to win the lottery and end up with an extra $1 or $2 million and can build a large space just for fermentation, then sure, we would invest in large format
get stainless
steel conical fermenters.
Yep. If I had,
and be gloriously happy.
But I'd hire people to do it for me.
Right. We had the opportunity to visit a brewer who was gracious enough to show us his fermentation room and all of his different conicals. He did beer, but it was so nice seeing the different stages and how he had a specific vessel for each stage and how they interplayed with each other.
Even the transfer of the brew between them was really fantastic.
It was glorious. I was just so excited.
A lot less manual work than what we do.
Yeah.
It was really, really cool.
It was super cool.
And if, like she said, if we had that kind of money, but they were also, what were they, 55 gallon or 80 gallon, 100 gallon plus fermenters? I mean, these things were huge.
Yeah. We would have to go commercial to really make any sense.
That doesn't make any sense at all. But on to like larger fermenters. And we talked about conicals just briefly, and it's going to be brief because, like we said, we've never actually used one. That's just what I know about them. Now, on to larger fermenters. We have a 3-gallon glass, 2 5-gallon buckets, and at least 1 5-gallon glass fermenter. Now, they carry much the same advantages and disadvantages as their smaller counterparts, because a narrow mouth, you just don't want to put solids in. It's going to be a lot harder to get to, whereas the buckets, you can totally just get your hands right in there and clean them out. The disadvantage to the larger fermenters is they're heavy. They hold a lot more. I know they're supposed to hold more, but when you put more liquid in there, I mean, we all know the saying, a pint's a pound the world around, right? Once you start filling up that 5-gallon vessel, it gets very heavy. Now, if that's glass and it slips and it cracks, you just wasted 5 gallons of whatever you were making all over your floor. If I'm going to break something, I'd rather it be 1 gallon than 5. I don't want to break it at all.
Yeah.
But if I had to choose, it'd be 1 or even maybe a quart, like a mason jar would be ideal. If I had no, the little
just none.
The little 2-ounce glass bottles would be
don't
ideal.
Don't break.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Breaking is bad.
So that's the disadvantage to the really large vessels.
They're also more expensive.
Yeah. And I know, not everybody is 20 years old anymore, and moving these things around gets hard. It's harder to mix them, except you can just use the whip attachment on a drill, and you can mix them up that way. But racking takes longer. You need longer hoses. You need to be able to move things around. It just complicates everything. And that's why on our show, we do 1 gallon, 2 gallon at most, I think is the most we really do.
Also, for the larger size glass carboys, Brian kind of mentioned it, but you will have to get specialized larger equipment for that. You're going to get
different autosiphon.
The larger autosiphon, the larger bottle brush cleaner, so that way it fits in there and gets all the way to the bottom.
They're like 2.5 feet tall.
Yeah.
Plus, then you have to have a place to store these.
Right.
Which is a thing unto itself.
Also, if you really want to do larger volumes of fermentation, I would highly suggest that you get it's kind of like a net brace.
They're like, it's a netting with handles.
Right.
So you can carry them.
That's really going to help you have a more stable hand, particularly on the glass ones that don't have any handles or anything like that to transport it. And have a friend. 2 is always better than 1 when dealing with those really large, heavy objects.
Absolutely. And that's about our experiences with the larger fermenters. We've only used them a few times. We've pretty much stuck to 2 gallons and below for most of our brewing career and been really happy with that. Because the main reason we do smaller ones, why we started doing smaller ones, is because I get bored very quickly. So I don't want to drink 5 gallons of something. I make 1 gallon. And if I want to make more of it, I'll make it again. If there is a type of fermenter that we didn't talk about that you would like more information on, that we could figure out more information on, leave it in a comment below and we'll see what we can do to find out more, or let us know what your favorite kind of fermenter is. And as always, guys, thanks so much for listening and have a great day.
Bye-bye.